Good evening and welcome to GB News. I'm Patrick Christys, and tonight we're looking into a story that should concern every citizen who values free speech and democracy. The United Nations, an organisation originally created to maintain international peace and security, appears to have found a new mission, becoming the world's disinformation warriors. The UN's Department of Global Communications, led by Under-Secretary General Melissa Fleming, is spearheading this alarming shift. Recently, at a gathering in Mexico, Fleming once again raised the alarm about what she calls the threat of misinformation and AI. But let's just take a moment really to consider what this really means. The UN, once focused on peacekeeping and humanitarian efforts, is now pushing for global control over information and emerging technologies. They're doing this through a series of what can only be described as nesting dolls of censorship and surveillance enabling treaties, resolutions, frameworks and initiatives. It's lawfare, isn't it, really? Fleming is promoting several controversial UN instruments. So shall we have a little look at all of these? There's the Pact for the Future, the Global Digital Compact, Global Principles for Information Integrity. Now, these might sound benign, even maybe positive. But let's look at what they actually entail. Digital ID systems, censorship targeting hate speech and misinformation, increased surveillance capabilities, algorithmic censorship, demonetization of content. Ladies and gentlemen, this is nothing short of a full-scale assault on free speech and privacy, with the old threat of bankrupting and debanking you thrown in there for good measure. Fleming's recent address to students in Guadalajara focused on regulating AI, ostensibly to defend democracy from disinformation. But let's be clear, this is about controlling the narrative, not protecting democracy. The panel that she spoke at was dramatically titled, "The Day When AI Would Replace Democracy." Well, this kind of fear-mongering is designed to justify sweeping controls over an entire emerging technology sector. And it's not the first time this has happened. We saw it in the United States after 9/11. They used that then as a perfect vehicle to have much more state control over every single one of our lives. Fleming claims that there's a crisis of mis- and disinformation in the world. She argues that AI is making it difficult to distinguish between what's real and what's not. But I ask you this. Is this really the crisis the UN should be focusing on? The UN seems more concerned about the decline of trust in institutions and legacy media than addressing the root cause of this mistrust. They're blaming misinformation and AI for a problem that's largely of their own making. Fleming is calling for urgent AI regulation. So the UN instruments I mentioned earlier are being touted as the governance frameworks to achieve this. They're being promoted as ensuring respect of human rights, prioritising the needs of vulnerable populations and being inclusive and equitable. But we must ask ourselves this. Who decides what constitutes misinformation? Who determines what speech is harmful? And most importantly, do we want an unelected, unaccountable global body making these decisions for us? Ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, this is a power grab of unprecedented proportions. Under the guise of protecting us all, the UN is positioning itself to control the flow of information on a global scale. Terrifying stuff this, when you really think about how this could end. The threat to free speech is absolutely massive. By pushing for AI regulation and global governance frameworks, the UN is paving the way for a world where free speech is no longer a right, but a privilege granted by those in power on their terms. These global governance frameworks threaten to erode national sovereignty. Countries may find themselves pressured to adopt policies that align with UN directives, regardless of their own democratic processes and what their own citizens want. It's worth noting that the UN seems to have strayed far from its original mandate. Instead of focusing on the pressing global issues of the day, like, armed conflicts, poverty, climate change, or famine, etc., they've decided that misinformation is the world's most urgent crisis. It does make you wonder what they've got to hide, doesn't it? But this shift in focus raises serious questions about the organisation's priorities and its understanding of its role in the international community. The UN's push for global governance of information and AI is particularly concerning when we consider the potential for abuse. History has shown us, time and time again, that centralised control of information is a hallmark of authoritarian regimes. By positioning itself as the arbiter of truth, The UN is setting a dangerous precedent. It's not hard to imagine a scenario, is it, where these powers could be used to suppress dissenting voices or inconvenient truths under the guise of combating misinformation. I mean, we've recently come out with a pandemic, haven't we? And you can see how this could be used in that context. When AI certainly presents challenges, it also does offer immense opportunities, it must be said, for progress and innovation. The UN's approach seems to focus solely on the negatives and ignoring the many ways that AI could be used to enhance democracy and improve access to information. Instead of seeking to control and regulate AI, perhaps we should be looking at ways to harness its power, to promote transparency, fact-checking, diverse perspectives. So, what can we do in the face of the looming threats to our freedoms? Well, you need to stay informed, don't you? Keep yourself updated on these UN initiatives and their potential implications, which of course is why you should be watching GB News. Speak out. Use your voice to raise awareness about these issues. Share this information with your friends, your family, and on social media. Contact your representatives. Urge your elected officials to scrutinise and challenge these UN proposals. And crucially, I think you need to support free speech initiatives. Back organisations like ours and platforms that champion free speech and resist censorship. Think critically. Don't be a sheep. Don't let fear-mongering about misinformation cloud your judgment. Just try to go with your gut. Your gut is usually right, I think. So bear that in mind. Question some narratives. Seek out different sources of information. Think for yourself. Rather than relying on top-down control of information, I think we should be focusing on improving media literacy by teaching people how to critically evaluate the information they've been given, spot potential biases. We can create a society that's resilient to misinformation without resorting to censorship. It's crucial to remember that the best antidote to bad ideas is not censorship, but better ideas. By allowing open debate and the free exchange of information, we create an environment where truth can emerge and flawed ideas can be challenged and discredited. Let's take a closer look now at some of the UN instruments that Fleming is promoting. The implementation of digital ID systems, that raises serious privacy concerns. There's also going to be a call for censorship aimed at so-called hate speech and misinformation. But who sets those terms? What's hate speech? Who tells you what hate speech is? I think that's very, very concerning. The proposals enable increased surveillance and even recommend algorithmic censorship and demonetization. Basically, every single thing you do ever on any piece of technology will be monitored, will be tracked, and it's not a million miles away from a Chinese-style social credit system, I suspect. These are not the actions of an organization committed to freedom and democracy, is it? They are the tools of control and suppression. Fleming's rhetoric is particularly concerning. By framing the issue as a crisis and using dramatic language like, as I said, the day when AI would replace democracy, she's creating a sense of urgency and fear. This is a classic tactic. It's classic, used to justify overreaching policies and the curtailment of freedoms. They make you believe that we're in a life and death crisis and this is the only course of action. But we must ask ourselves this. Threat to democracy that Fleming claims it is? Or is the real threat coming from those who seek to control the flow of ideas and information? Fleming points to the decline of trusted institutions and legacy media as a problem that needs to be addressed. Well, I would be inclined to agree, but that is because institutions and legacy media have lied on numerous occasions and the people are now able to see that for themselves. I don't think that's a problem with the people, that's a problem with the institutions and the media, isn't it? But perhaps instead of blaming misinformation, maybe we should be asking why that trust has been eroded in the first place. The UN's campaign against disinformation and its push for AI regulation through global governance frameworks represents a clear and present danger to free speech and democracy. We must remain vigilant and resist these attempts to control the flow of information and ideas. And remember, a truly free society is one where all ideas can be expressed and debated openly. It's through this process of free exchange that truth emerges, democracy thrives. We must not let the fear of misinformation lead us down a path that ends up in censorship and thought control. It's Orwellian, isn't it? I don't think we need to go down that route. This is Patrick Christys for GB News, reminding you to think critically, speak freely, and never take your liberties for granted. And on that note, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more originals content. See you next time.